Summon the Gods by Melinda Kucsera, Book 2 of the Rogue Gods Trilogy.
Part 10.
Chapter 38. Take Me Back. Ivarian, where are you? I need to talk to you. It's important. Rosalie ran through the library, ignoring everyone and everything in her haste to find him. Her footsteps echoed ominously, but that was because of the naked stone walls rising at least 40 feet above her head and possibly higher.
What's wrong?
Ivarian stepped out of a narrow aisle into the sitting area, divided by blankets into quarters for survivors. It all just spilled out of her as she skidded to a halt in front of him. Rosalie left nothing out, not even what Layla said about the time crystals or the strange flashes of her mother in the past and the other copies of them. When she finished her account, she shut her mouth with a click and waited for him to say something. Anything would do right now. Rosalie twisted a section of her skirt just to do something as he stayed silent. His face was impassive, giving her no hint of what he thought, not even an eye twitch. Did I shock him? Should I shake him? Probably not, since he's my only link to the past, and everything seems to point back to something that happened 20 years ago. But what was that event? The longer he stayed silent and stared off into the middle distance, the more she wanted to shake him, but she interlaced her fingers together over her stomach to keep from doing that. It sounds insane, but it's all true, Rosalie said, just to say something. His quietude grated on her nerves. Worse still, she had no proof of any of it. Rosalie tried not to fidget as that depressing realization sunk in. He must believe me. I wouldn't lie or make up something like this. Nor was it a hallucination. Something was very wrong with the arrow of time. She was as certain of that as she was of her own name. Everine finally looked at her, but he stared at her like she had two heads. The book he was holding fell from his hands and clattered on the floor. Don't you see? We need to go to the arrow of time to make sure it's okay. She didn't think it was all right. Time felt like it was losing cohesion, maybe even breaking apart. If they didn't stop that, then she could never fix the timeline and restore the future that they should be living. Rosalie grabbed his hand, but she couldn't tow him to the arrow of time. Neither could she let go when he was her only way to travel back in time.
No, we can't do that. You heard what my aunt said.
Ivarian lowered his voice to a whisper as he yanked his hand away from her.
We could interfere with her efforts to stop that dystopian future she talked about, and I won't do that.
What are you afraid of? Rosalie searched his gray eyes for answers. He feared something, and it couldn't be upsetting his aunt. Faye was a formidable woman, but she was still his aunt, and she would forgive him, eventually. Something bad might be happening right now to the arrow of time. Surely his aunt would be angrier if he didn't do something about that. Panic beat in her chest. Rosalie tried to quell it with cold logic because panicking never solved anything. Besides, she needed to appear rational, not like a hysterical girl. That wouldn't help her case. Ivarian turned away while she got her panic under control, but he didn't pick up the book he dropped.
I'm afraid of making things worse, aren't you?
Rosalie bit her lip. I didn't even think about that. But she was smart enough not to say that aloud. The realization took Rosalie aback for a moment. How can I make things worse? I just want to see what's going on. We don't have to touch anything. We don't even have to do anything. I just need to see that the arrow of time is still intact. Rosalie crossed her fingers behind her back because she wanted to do a lot more than look. But he didn't need to know that. If her gut was right, then the arrow of time needed someone to defend it, and that someone should be them.
I can't take you there. I promised my aunt I wouldn't, and I won't break that promise.
Ivarian bent to retrieve the book he dropped. Then call her. Ask her to come right now and tell us what's happening. Surely she'll know. Then we don't need to go anywhere. Rosalie folded her arms and tried not to tap her feet. This was taking too long. She felt like sand grains were sliding through her, counting down to something terrible. I just wish I knew what that event was.
I can't call her. I don't know how. I only just met her.
Ivarian shoved the book onto the shelf closest to him to get rid of it, just like he was trying to do to her concerns. Well, he couldn't avoid her. Then we need to go back to the arrow of time. Rosalie tried to grab his arm so she could turn him around to face her.
No, I won't do it.
Ivarian strode away through one of the narrow aisles in this cavernous library. Could Ran wish me into the past? That sounded like a bad idea even to her. But desperate times called for desperate measures, and Ran was easier to convince. As she turned to go look for him, the gray crystal tried to fly out of her pocket. But crystals couldn't fly on their own. Rosalie slapped her hand over her skirt pocket to keep it closed, but the crystal kept trying to escape. Her pocket bulged. Would the stitches hold? Or would they break and split open open her pocket, releasing the stone. I probably shouldn't wait for that to happen. That would cause quite a scene. Rosalie reached in and caught the crystal before it could escape. Can you take me to the arrow of time? She asked, as she turned the stone over on her palm.
I already told you no,
Everian said, but shelves of books hid him from sight. Unfortunately, the crystal didn't answer her. She didn't think it would, but that was too bad, because that might be the only way she'd ever find out what it could do. Rosalie sighed in frustration, then turned to look for Ran. But there was no need to search. Ran stood in an adjacent aisle and pretended to look at the books on the shelves. How much did you hear? Rosalie strode toward him as she clenched her fist around the stone.
You already know the answer to that.
Ran leaned against the shelves that he just pretended to peruse and winked. You know, eavesdropping is a bad habit. You should try to break it. Rosalie ran her hand down the spines on the nearest shelf.
I know, but you're happy I didn't choose today to break that habit, and you know it.
Rand grinned at her. True. So, will you help me convince him? Rosalie leaned against the shelves next to him. The time crystal lay in her palm like it didn't just try to escape her. Somehow, Rand's presence calmed it down.
Do I have a choice?
Rand stopped smiling. I don't think any of us do. Something's happening, and I think the answer might be at the arrow of time. Rosalie ran the toe of her boot along a crack in the stone floor, then explained about the arrow of time when Rand didn't say anything. Silence was totally unlike him. So, will you help me? She asked when his confused scowl softened into concern.
Yeah, let's go find him. I can't promise he'll listen to me.
Ran waved for her to precede him. I know, he's jealous of you. Rosalie blew out a breath and tried to release all her frustration into the air at the same time, but it didn't work because she was partly to blame for Avarian feeling like that. Rand was so easy to talk to, and there were no complicated feelings or a mutual attraction to muddle things.
I know, but that's your problem. You're the one who's giving him reasons to be jealous.
Rand gave her a pointed look. Why did he have to be right about that? I should have gone after him. Rosalie stomped her foot on the stone floor and didn't care if she was acting like a petulant child. Rand wouldn't treat her any differently because of that.
Yes, you should have. Since I'm not giving up eavesdropping today, I would have just followed you both and continued eavesdropping.
Rand shrugged when she glanced back at him. Rosalie laughed and almost tripped over her feet. That wasn't what she'd expected him to say, and she had to lean against a bookcase until the urge to laugh faded. But she felt better after that. Laughing at his comment released the last of the panic, and she breathed it out as she resumed her search for Avarian. How do I convince him to take me back in time again? She still needed a plan, and the direct approach had failed already. Repeating it wouldn't yield different results.
You need to speak to his fears and address them.
How do I do that? He fears going against his aunt, and she forbade him to take me back in time again. Rosalie scanned the aisle ahead for Avarian's pale hair, but there were just more books, shelved higher than even Ran was tall. The shelves seemed to go on forever, too. Who wrote all these books? How did they find so much to say?
That's tricky. You have to keep in mind that he's not like us. We're always looking for loopholes and ways around our overbearing parents to do what we want. But he's not like that. So you need to convince him that not going to the past would do more harm than following his aunt's edict.
Rosalie turned and batted her lashes at Ran as she walked backward. Or you could tell him you'll wish me back to the past if he doesn't take me there himself. Ran laughed.
It's a good thing all that lash batting you're doing has no effect on me. A weaker man might give in to you.
But not you. Rosalie turned around and hunched her shoulders while she pummeled her brain for another way to convince Avarian. If only Ran would play along.
No, I can't wish for you to go back to some point in time for a bunch of reasons. I don't know what would happen to you. And I'm not explaining that to your mom. She scares me.
If that's the only reason you're saying no, then let me assure you that you won't need to do any explaining to her because, in this timeline, she's dead. Rosalie glanced at him over her shoulder to gauge his reaction, but just saying that punched her in the gut. I will bring you back, Mom. I just need to figure out how to fix the timeline. Rand shook his head.
The answer's still no. My money's on you to figure out this timeline business and straighten it out, at which point your mom would then be alive again, and I don't want to have anything to explain to her. So I'll continue to be a supportive friend and a perfect angel.
Rand steepled his hands like he was praying. Rosalie turned back around. Do you know where he is? I can't convince him if I can't find him.
I might have an idea about that.
Rand caught her arm and turned her to the right when the aisle ended at a four-way intersection.
Hey, Avarian, your girlfriend needs to talk to you.
Ahead, Avarian sat on the floor with his back to the shelves full of books and his head in his hands.
Go away. I don't want to talk anymore about anything.
Silence never fixed anything. After living for years with my too quiet father, I can confirm that. So let's discuss this like the adults we all are.
Rand let go of Rosalie. She regarded Avarian from a few feet away, and her heart went out to him because his mother would stay dead too if they didn't untangle the timeline. timelines. Should I sit next to him? Standing felt wrong since she towered over him, so she slid down the shelving unit, feeling every spine dig into her back and butt until she sat on the cold floor next to him. I know you're afraid of letting your aunt down, but you could tell her the truth. I forced you to take me back in time. Tell her I had help from my good buddy Ran. Rosalie patted Avarian's knee.
Oh, no, you didn't. I'm just here for moral support. I won't wish anyone anywhere unless they're a demon, in which case I'm okay with not knowing what happens to them. After all, they attacked my home. They deserve to suffer after all the suffering they caused.
Ran clenched his fists. This was the angriest she'd ever seen him, and he vibrated with it. Okay, just tell your aunt I forced you. Rosalie patted Avarian's knee again. Then she'll take out her anger on me, not you.
You can't force me.
Avarian finally raised his head from the cage his hands made. Oh, really? Rosalie shot to her feet, as if her butt were on fire. It wasn't, but her pride was, and that fire made her face hot as she glared at Avarian. Who did he think she was? Some girl who asked for things on a whim? It was past time she showed him what she was capable of. Rosalie whipped out the dagger sheathed under her sleeve and froze. No, I'm not a blood witch. She sheathed the dagger, then whirled and stared at Ran without blinking long enough for him to shift his weight uneasily from foot to foot.
Why are you glaring at me? I'm not the one who said no. I should leave you two to work out your differences.
Rand backed away as her witch sight finally kicked in and white glowing threads appeared on the stone floor where he just stood a moment before. Unfortunately, the remnants of his power probably couldn't help her, but Avarian's could. Rosalie turned her sight on him, but no glowing threads surrounded Avarian because he wasn't using his magic. Damn it! Frustration stoked the fire inside her until it was a raging inferno of frustration burning her up from the inside. She wanted to scream and punch something, but she forced herself to take deep breaths and count to 10 to calm down. Hysterics wouldn't help her case. An invisible force tugged on her hand, gripping the time crystal. If only it could take her backward in time. Maybe it was a trick of the light or a hallucination, but reality bent around the crystal, warping it. Were there filaments radiating off the time crystal? Rosalie squinted at them. Could I use them to weave a time travel spell? She knew nothing about using that kind of magic. If it was possible, then it was worth a try if nothing else, because it might prod Avarian into helping her. The stone jerked forward, dragging her along the stone floor until she struck a shelving unit and the book squeezed into every available space. Ouch! Pain radiated out from her nose, but it wasn't broken, just mad at her for hitting the spines of 5 books with her face.
What are you doing?
Avarian stared at her as she rubbed her aching face. I'm going to the arrow of time with or without your help. Which will it be? Choose quickly, because this crystal is going and I'm going with it. Rosalie felt the ground drop away as she delivered that ultimatum. Maybe the time crystal had a flair for the dramatic, because it waited until she said her piece before sending her flying through the library above the shelving units. A stone wall loomed ahead of her, and her whole body tingled as she approached it. Then the wall and the library vanished, and she shot so high into the night sky that the stars should have brushed her fist. Why are the stars still so tiny? That was the last thought that crossed her mind as a suffocating darkness wrapped around her.
Chapter 39 Immortality. To the orange sky darkening as night came, the adversary threw back his head and shouted,
"Come, Creator, come down here and see what my dark deeds have done. Come and watch as I break your creation into 1,000,000,000 tiny pieces. Come, I call you."
His violet eyes darkened, and darkness seemed to spill out of them. Layla backed away as the words of her alter ego rang in her ears.
"It's not over. I have allies, and they will stop this. But you need to stall him."
Stall him how? Layla racked her mind for something she could do to give these supposed allies a chance, but nothing sprang to mind. How do you have anyone? I locked you away. The so-called sleeping angel didn't answer. She just stood on the roof and pointed at a disturbance in the ranks of the fallen angels, lined up behind the adversary. Was someone pushing their way through them? I wish I were taller so I could see over the crowd and find out what's happening behind it. Layla craned her neck, but it was no use. She couldn't see what made the fallen angels in the third to last row turn around. A war cry pierced the silence when the adversary stopped calling to heaven. His cries fell on deaf ears anyway. There was no way the Creator would come to hell. The Creator severed all bonds during the fall when all the traitors came here.
"What's going on back there?"
The adversary headed for the source of the disturbance until the front rank stopped him.
"It's nothing, sir. Continue with your plan,"
said the fallen angel, standing right right in front of the adversary. It was the blonde one from the prison, and his buddy nodded like nothing was wrong. Liars. Something was definitely happening. How can I use this to stall him? Layla craned her neck again, and just caught a fleeting glimpse of a dark-haired woman spinning like a top with her arms out, knocking down the fallen angels who got in her way. Was the woman laughing? Probably. My alter ego couldn't have found anyone sane to take on the adversary. Well, I might as well do something crazy too. Layla crashed into the adversary's back and looped the chain connecting her manacles around his neck. That wouldn't kill him since angels were immortal and they didn't need to breathe since their bodies weren't normally made of flesh and blood. But in hell, they were, because a spirit couldn't suffer without flesh to wound. So she stepped backward and crossed her wrists to tighten the chain around his neck. Now I just need to hold him here until these allies show up. At least that wasn't too hard. Layla could hold it for a while until her arms tired. Would that be long enough? How long did these allies need?
You can't kill me.
You can't kill me either. But she didn't need to destroy him, just stall him. And so far, she was doing that. Hands grabbed her and lifted her and the chain off him, and there went that plan. Maybe he'll waste some time punishing me. Layla struggled more for form's sake than to actually get free from the 4 fallen angels holding onto her limbs. They dropped her on the ground at the adversary's feet, and he glared down at her as another disturbance rippled through the fallen angels lined up behind him like toy soldiers. They looked unnaturally alike, like someone copied the first fallen angel in each row 100 times. That was probably the adversary's doing, because the creator preferred each of his creations to be unique.
I think the guest of honor has arrived.
The adversary turned his back on her and waved to the assembled. A fallen angel broke from the ranks and dropped a woman on the ground near Layla, but the adversary didn't even glance at her.
Make a hole. Let the traitor come forward.
As the fallen angel stepped to either side, a dark-hailed angel with a veiled demon following him marched toward them. He looked kind of familiar. I hope this isn't the ally my other self spoke of. 1 angel and 1 demon are no match for the adversary and his army of goons. Layla picked herself up off the ground in case these were the allies she was waiting for. I hope they have a plan, because I don't.
Are you looking for this?
The adversary grabbed a handful of the unconscious woman's hair and yanked her up. A few feet away, the angel stopped and stared at her. The power of his mind slammed into her and nearly knocked her flat on her back as it peeled back her defenses like they were nothing more than layers of an onion. Layla stared at the ground. Don't let me have my secrets. They're all I have left in this world. She gripped the chain connecting her wrists until her knuckles ached.
All right, you can keep them for now. I didn't come here for you anyway,
said the angel, and his mind voice was so damned familiar. How do I know you? Layla didn't send that question to him. Since his attention shifted to the adversary, the fool stood his ground like he had nothing to fear from this powerful angel. Maybe he didn't. What do I really know about his power? Nothing, and that was a problem she couldn't solve right now. Or could she? Ideas percolated in the back of her mind.
I'm here. That's what you wanted, so let my friend go. You won again.
The angel stared at the ground and hunched his shoulders.
True. All right, take your friend.
The adversary flung the unconscious woman on the ground between them, and her glowing violet eyes opened and then rolled back. The veiled demon passed the angel and dragged the unconscious angel to the edge of the gateway, then knelt at her side. That was strange. Since when did an angel and a demon team up, let alone 2 of them?
What do you want with me? You've tried many times to capture me, and every time you've failed,
asked the angel, and he sounded like he really wanted to know.
When you look into the abyss, it looks back at you.
The adversary laughed, but he stood in front of her, so she couldn't see why he said that to the angel.
Say my name. I know you read it.
Samiel, you delved into the unformed, an abyss under hell,
the angel said, like he was in a trance. His voice was soft and dreamy, despite the terrifying things he just said.
I did. And do you know what I found there? The spark that set existence ablaze with light and life.
The adversary clapped a hand on the angel's shoulder and pulled him closer so he could whisper in his ear.
And do you know what else I found?
No,
said the angel, as if he were caught in a spell.
We're all grains of sand in a cosmic hourglass. But, unlike mortals, our grains never fall, but they will now.
The adversary ripped out something from the angel's chest and held up a crystal covered in lavender blood. It was a time crystal, of course. So that's what makes us immortal. Layla covered her mouth. I know what he's planning and why he needs an army, but it's not to conquer anything. That's a lie, he told them, so they'd march to their doom. If she was right, then behind the fallen angels, the ex-gods and other immortals lined up to sacrifice their immortality to the adversary's plan. Who could she tell? Who could stop him? None of the fallen angels or ex-gods would listen to her, and maybe it was best if they lost the time they had left. Most were angry or bitter about their incarceration in hell. Oblivion might be a welcome change for some. The veiled demon rushed to catch the angel as he collapsed, and they pulled him over to the other angel, who was shaking off her unconsciousness. The glare she cut the adversary would have made a weaker man pee himself in fear of her wrath.
You can save him, said the sleeping angel.
As she appeared, she held up a gray crystal, just like the one the adversary pulled out of the angel.
Save him and take back your power before it's too late.
The adversary, she couldn't call him Samuel. He didn't deserve a name. He spread his hands and gathered the attention of his army of time crystal-carrying immortals.
They sent us to hell to get rid of us, but we'll take back everything we lost. Through there lies our destiny. Who will storm the gates of heaven with me? Who will fight until it becomes the new hell?
Cheers erupted, and they drowned out the sleeping angel's plea. The adversary signaled for silence.
Follow me, and we'll bring such ruin that the Creator will weep.
The adversary turned on his heel and marched through the swirling energies of the entrance to the gateway without a backward glance. The fallen angels and the ex-gods charged through it after him, leaving her with one demon, two angels, and one ghost in the middle of an abandoned intersection in a city in hell.
You must stop him.
The sleeping angel grasped her upper arms and shook Layla. How can I do that? He won, we lost. Layla didn't try to break free.
No, we didn't,
said another woman. The other angel must have awoken.
By your eyes, I know you're an angel like us, and we don't give up.
By your chains, I know you're not here willingly,
said the male angel. His voice wavered, and it must have taken all his strength to push those words out. Was he right? Layla stared at him over the transparent shoulder of the sleeping angel.
Semeo.
The angel began, then stopped like he just couldn't use that name.
I mean the adversary. He tricked me and made me think I belonged in hell so I'd fall. I think he did the same thing to you. That's why you're in chains.
Give him back the time the adversary stole.
The sleeping angel let go of her arms and instead captured her hand and turned it palm up so she could place the time crystal on it.
This crystal gives us our immortality. It gives us infinite time, and I think we anchor a corner of existence, ensuring that time will go on forever.
The sleeping angel closed her fist around it, then stepped forward and embraced her. Memories boiled out of the depths of her mind as they merged and once more became one entity. The sleeping angel slept no more when violet light burst from Layla's eyes and white wings sprouted from her back as she staggered to the angel lying on the ground, bleeding lavender blood from a hole in his chest. Layla dropped to her knees beside him, and the time crystal dropped from her hand into the hole. Her hand landed on top of it, sealing the wound with the power flowing out of her.
What are you doing?
The veiled demon tried to pull her hand away. Layla shoved the demon away. Let me do this. After all, that's my lot in life. I'm always fixing what others broke.
Thank you. I'm Arjanil. That's Thaniel, and this is Natalie,
said the angel she'd just healed. I'm Layla, and I guess I'm also the sleeping angel. Layla bit her lip and hoped that didn't sound as ridiculous aloud as it sounded in her head. Why couldn't her alter ego come up with a better name than that? It sounded like something out of a fairy tale, but thinking about that kept her mind off her past, while she wove his light and spirit around the time crystal, so the adversary couldn't steal it again. When his flesh knitted the wound closed, Layla pulled her hand away and knelt there as memories from a long time ago ripped free from their cages, and words tumbled out. I followed him to the abyss. He offered to make me a goddess, and I thought that would give me more power. She shook her head as a bitter laugh tore out of her, and she tasted ashes.
You're talking about the adversary, right?
Natalie asked from where they knelt on the other side of Arjanil. Their color-shifting eyes tracked everything Layla did until she let go of him. Layla nodded and tossed a handful of rocks away. But I had to give up something, and my angelic nature was the price. Instead of giving me more power, I had less than when I went in. By then, the war in heaven was over, and the gates of hell were closed. He tricked me, then trapped me here.
That's why you stole some of the abyss and gave it to women human on Earth so they could access the unseen that flows from the abyss and weave the remnants of magic to fix things.
Natalie nodded, like that solved a riddle they were working on. How did you know that? Layla stared at the veiled demon in shock. Unlike the ex-god who gave mankind fire, she didn't go around advertising that fact.
Because I have that same power.
Natalie extended their gloved hand, and black threads wove together on their palm as they manipulated the unseen power surrounding them. How do you have that power? Layla still couldn't wrap her mind around that. Witches were human, not demons.
Before the fall, the adversary and some of his soon-to-be fallen friends lay with the daughters of men. Everyone knows about that, but few know he had just as many female angel friends as he had male ones, and they lay with the sons of men. Where do you think the children of those female angels went?
Natalie withdrew their hand and rose to their feet.
They were never supposed to exist. Angels aren't allowed to sleep with mortals.
Daniel caught Arjaniel's hand and pulled him up.
You've slacked off enough. Let's get you on your feet before you become a sluggard.
Don't I get a moment to rest? The adversary just ripped my chest open.
Arjaniel protested as she pulled him to his feet, but he stayed standing when she let go. Natalie drifted closer, and their gloved hands twitched like they wanted to touch him, but they didn't. Interesting. So the demon was sweet on him. He was handsome, but so were all angels. Wait, are you saying the children of that union went to hell during the fall? But they were just children. Layla rose, too, since everyone else was standing. How much of a lead should they give the adversary? Probably not much if they could help it, but they still didn't have a plan to stop him.
Yes, since the mothers were with child, their unborn babies went with them when they fell.
Natalie hugged themselves.
What happened after they gave birth?
Daniel caught Natalie's hand and squeezed it. Layla was glad she asked that, but she had a bad feeling about the answer.
I think you know. What do women do with babies they no longer want?
Natalie glanced away, but not before Daniel engulfed them in a tight hug. We should go. If the adversary does what I think he'll do, then we might not have much time before we all cease to exist. Layla looked at the gateway. Why did its entrance have to look like a giant glowing white eye? She shuddered when it looked back at her.
Forget that. He might take down the gateway. We'd better get to the other end before that happens.
Daniel tossed a surprised Natalie over her shoulder and ran straight into the gateway as the demon laughed at her antics.
Come on, we'd better follow them. Thaniel has a habit of running headfirst into danger.
Arjaniel smiled like he was suppressing laughter. When he caught her eye, he waved for her to go ahead. You go first. Layla gestured for him to precede her, but he caught her hand and dragged her along in his wake. Arjaniel stopped on the threshold as the gateway flickered. Was it collapsing? Did the adversary order one of his sycophants to take it down already? Layla stared at it until her eyes crossed.
What are you the angel of?
The question caught her by surprise. Before she could answer, the gateway flared up so brightly she had to cover her eyes.
We'd better go now.
Arjaniel yanked her across that blinding threshold into the tunnel that connected the two endpoints of the gateway, and hell disappeared behind her.
Chapter 40, How to Break Time. What are you doing? Ivarian stared at Rosalie. Did she just slide into a bookcase face first? Rosalie rubbed her face, but she didn't step away from the shelves of books.
I'm going to the Arrow of Time with or without your help. Which will it be? Choose quickly because this crystal is going there, and I'm going with it.
Rosalie rose into the air after delivering that ultimatum, then flew toward the stone wall enclosing the library. What are you doing? Ivarian ran after her and almost slammed into Rand, but he veered at the last second and missed him.
I didn't know she could fly.
Rand leaned against a bookcase as he watched her go. Why didn't he stop her? Can't you stop her? Ivarian couldn't understand why he just stood there. Why wasn't he worried about her?
I could try, but I need to know what's causing her to fly. Then I can wish for something to counteract that. But she could get hurt when whatever's making her fly fails, so I don't think I should risk that. It's too bad Dad's not here. He could just trap her in a shield and cushion her fall.
Rand folded his arm. While he speculated, Rosalie shot toward a solid stone wall at an alarming rate. If you don't do something, that wall will hurt her pretty badly at the speed she's traveling. Ivarian glared at Rand. He shouldn't need to point that out.
That's true. I guess I couldn't hurt her any more than that wall would.
Rand removed a glowing rock from his pocket and bounced it on his palm as a thoughtful look crossed his face. As Rosalie became translucent, the floor shook and folded solid, as if the library were made of paper instead of stone.
What's happening?
Mirren asked from another aisle.
I don't know.
Rand stopped bouncing the stone. An invisible force reached into Ivarian's chest and grabbed hold of something. It yanked hard on whatever it grabbed and jerked him toward another section of the wall as it lifted him into the air. Around him, the library warped and twisted as if he dragged it along in his wake somehow, but that was impossible. Behind and below him, Mirren hobbled toward his staring nephew on an island cut out of the center of the library. Mirren's question echoed in his ears. "What's happening?" Ivarian shouted. Hopefully Rand had a clue, or if he didn't, he could wish for one. Either would do at this point.
If I knew that, I'd know how to stop it.
Rand yelled back, but that wasn't helpful. Was Rosalie right? Did something happen to the arrow of time? How could it? Ivarian closed his eyes. If he didn't check, he'd never forgive himself. Before he could call up his time magic, he became transparent, just like Rosalie, and passed through the wall into the night outside Mount Eredrin. An object hurtled toward him, blocking the stars and the sky above, and it seemed to bell out like a skirt. "Rosalie!" Ivarian rose toward her, pulled by that invisible force that still had a firm grip on something inside him. Did Rand wish for Rosalie to come back? She slammed into him, and he wrapped both arms around her, but Rosalie hung limp in his arms. "Rosalie, what happened?"
I couldn't breathe, so I fell.
She whispered as she wrapped an arm around his neck and rested her head on his shoulder.
We have to go back to 20 years ago. Something happened then, and we need to find out what, or we'll never figure out how to stop it.
"Are you sure?" Ivarian held her tightly, wishing he'd put his arms around her when they weren't in danger. Her hair was messy, but it was soft against his chin, and it still smelled faintly of smoke from when they visited that fiery place where all futures sprang from.
Yes, I think that's why I kept seeing flashes from then.
Rosalie glanced at the darkness below them.
Are we flying?
Kind of. Something laid hold of me, and it's pulling us upward. He should do something about that, but how could he break its hold on him? Rosalie felt along his head, shoulders, and chest, and he tried not to squirm.
I don't feel anything. Try using your magic. Let's see if that rids you of whatever is lifting you.
Aunt Faye forbade him to go to the past, but she didn't say anything about going to the Arrow of Time. As Ivarian realized that, the wind blew his hair out of his eyes. He felt for the currents of time, and they chilled him as he wrapped them around them. A white arrow glowed in the distance as a white flash blinded him. When the light faded, Ivarian landed on his backside in the snow, and it crunched under him. Rosalie ended up on his lap.
Did it work?
She climbed off him and rose, then hugged herself when a chill wind blew past. "I think so." Ivarian rubbed his chest. It still felt like something was in his chest, but he was probably imagining that. Rosalie reached for his hand and pulled him up.
Come on, let's go see it.
The wind slammed into him as he stood up and stole his body heat, leaving him shivering in its wake, but a white light shone to his left. "It's over there." Ivarian wrapped an arm around her shaking shoulders as he led her across the icy plain. Why couldn't the past be somewhere warm? Ivarian squinted through the biting wind at that glow, then stopped. The Arrow of Time should sprawl horizontally for as far as he could see, but something interrupted its glow, making the arrow's shaft look like a jagged line instead of a solid one. What happened here?
"It's all breaking down,"
Hylar said as he stepped through the 6-foot gap between two sections of the Arrow of Time that towered over him. What could possibly break it? Ivarian trudged close enough to touch an icy chunk of the Arrow of Time.
"They did it."
Hylar grabbed his arm and pulled them aside as a massive metal fist smashed into a nearby section of the Arrow of Time and smashed it into the ice crystals pelting them.
Control is not chaos,
said the agents of chaos from where they sat on a severed section of the Arrow of Time. They sounded like a petulant child that didn't get its way.
"Will you stop doing that?"
Hylar pointed at the metal man having a tantrum, and ice blasted from his hand. It struck the super agent of chaos in the chest and knocked him off the broken pieces of the Arrow of Time.
Why did you say control is not chaos? Who wants control, and what do they want to control?
Rosalie shouted as she stumbled toward a gap between the giant ice blocks towering over her.
He was once the brightest star in the firmament and the most powerful angel, but that wasn't enough for him.
The super agent of chaos stood, and its head brushed the cloudy sky. Next to it, the Arrow of Time looked like a toy beside its metal feet. Who's he? Ivarian glanced at his cousin, but Hylar just shrugged.
"This is the most it's said since it went on a rampage."
What does he want?
Rosalie waved for them to stay quiet. Maybe she already knew who the clockwork creature meant. Gears clicked in the quiet that fell as the super agent of chaos considered her question.
He lied to us. He said there would be chaos, but that's not true.
Why did you work with my uncle? Ivarian hoped. It would answer, because because this all started because of Uncle Hithagler. Nothing this creature said could convince him otherwise.
He promised to bring chaos to the world, but the trap caught him too, so the adversary wins again.
The super agent of chaos stomped on a block of time, shattering it. The pieces glittered in the glow of the remaining sections of the arrow of time as they rose into the sky, heading possibly to this adversary. Who's the adversary? Ivarian jerked forward as an invisible force pulled on something inside his chest. Pain tore through him as it tried to wrench something out of him. Hylar cried out and gripped his chest as if he were experiencing the same thing. Was some invisible creature attacking them? What's happening? Ivarian felt around for the thing yanking something out of him, but his hands passed through nothing at all except the chilly air.
It's begun.
The super agent of chaos threw its head back and howled at the sky as it shattered into a billion clockwork insects. Amid the swarm, a gray crystal floated away and vanished into the clouds above.
Is it dead?
Hylar bent double as he tried to keep whatever the invisible force was trying to rip out of him inside his chest.
I don't think so. Look there.
Rosalie tapped his shoulder as she pointed with her other hand at the clockwork insects. The swarm flew after the crystal. What do we do now? Ivarian crossed his arms over his chest to keep all his organs inside, so the hard object pressing against his ribs didn't shoot out of his chest.
Do you know how to fix this?
Rosalie gestured to the broken chunks of the arrow of time. Parts of it might still be intact, since it spanned miles. No, but my mom might. Ivarian shook his head, then blinked as Rosalie doubled. Either he was seeing double or two Rosalies stood there. The duplicate winked at him, then touched the nearest section of the arrow of time. A horizontal shaft of ice 3 feet wide shot out, holding head-size ice crystals that marked key events in that year. Which year was that? Rosalie's double vanished, leaving one Rosalie behind, but the shelf remained extended like an invitation. Rosalie turned as if seeing it for the first time, and she ran along its length, searching for something. When she found it, she skidded to a halt.
We need to go now. Come with me.
She turned and extended her hand.
Come back with me one last time to the past.
That's not a good idea. You could get stuck there and there wouldn't be anything I could do since the arrow is broken. That means time is broken too. This is how you break a timeline.
Hylar waved to the scattered chunks of glowing ice around them, then screamed as something ripped out of his chest. The bloody object rose as he dropped to the ground with a hole in his chest.
We have to go now?
Rosalie ran back, grabbed his hand, and pulled him to the event she wanted to visit. What year is that? Ivarian pressed against the thing, trying to escape his body.
The one we need.
Rosalie touched the largest ice crystal for that year, and of course, Uncle Hithagler's face appeared in it, twisted with anger as he shouted at someone outside the image. Ivarian punched the crystal, hitting the image of his uncle right in the jaw as white light exploded from it. Then he was falling, but Rosalie's hand was warm in his, and he squeezed her hand. They were in this together, come what may, and that was a comforting thought.
Chapter 41. Take it down. The Gurren slammed into a glowing green wall. Damn it. Why wouldn't the summoning spell release him? It did its job already. Why was it still operational? Someone should end the spell. But that someone wouldn't be him, since that wasn't one of his skills.
Are you out of your mind?
Faye pointed at Pristina in case anyone was unclear about just who she was calling insane.
No, for the first time in a long time, I see the truth. It's you who's crazy.
Pristina held the gray crystal out like it was an offering. Garen dropped back to stand even with Janari. Can your people do anything? A whole lot of half-human creatures stood behind Pristina, and they looked like Janari. The females didn't have antlers, but they were just as muscular as their male counterparts. Why were they just standing there? Garen closed his mouth before he could ask that, and look more like a fool than he already did. The answer was obvious when he stopped to think about it. They wanted their god back. So, no, Janari's people wouldn't do anything, as long as he was caught up in this drama.
No, I won't ask them to get involved. This is between the time gods. It's got nothing to do with us, and I'd rather they sort that out without us.
Janari backed away from them. Clearly, he didn't hear the part about one time goddess destroying all of time to off herself. It was an ambitious plan, but it could succeed with help from the adversary. There's got to be something I can do. Garen glanced around. Something must be powering this spell. If he could find it, then he could stop stop it. That might send me back to hell. He froze at that unwelcome thought, then shook it off. What good was staying on Earth if it ceased to exist? That convinced him. He scanned the ground. Symbols covered it, and of course, they were all lit up with the Earth magic flowing through them. He followed the inner ring of symbols to the center, because to read this script, he needed to start there and wind his way outward from row to row. Instead of a symbol in the center of the spell circle, there was a large rock, approximately 6 feet long, 4 feet high, and 3 feet wide. Garen wasn't that tall anymore, so he had to lean over the rock to see what lay on the other side. One glance answered his other question. A young mage powered this spell, and he was probably in his late teens. He lay on the ground at the base of the rock, letting earth magic flow out of him into the spell circle like water ran off a mountain. A baby who looked like a miniature copy of him, from his short, messy dark hair to his bright grass-green eyes, sat on his chest and plucked at his tunic. A puppy sniffed the baby's backside, and that just made the tyke giggle. Meanwhile, a young woman who looked a little older than the mage crouched on his other side, holding a baby to her breast. She covered the baby with a red padded jacket she must have removed so the baby could feed. Well, that wasn't what he thought he'd find. Garen glanced over his shoulder when the trees outside the spell circle leaned hard toward Pristina and her time crystal. Come on, Faye. Keep her busy for a little longer.
We won't let you get away with this.
Faye shouted as if she heard his request. Good. Too bad the spell circle interfered with her powers. Excuse me.
Who are you?
The woman settled her daughter on her lap so she could put her padded jacket back on. That's not important right now. How do we get him to stop whatever he's doing? Garen pointed at the mage, and his son waved and said, "Hi, hello to you too, little one."
I don't know how to stop it,
said the mage, and his large hand gently gripped his son. Damn, that meant he probably wasn't powering it by choice. Do you have any ideas? Garen pointed at the dark-haired woman.
I might have one.
She picked up her daughter, then just sat there. Well, can you hurry up and do it? Time's running out. Garen never was a patient man, but right now, his impatience might save the world, and that put a smile on his face.
Maybe for you it is, but we still need to escape with our kids, and we don't have a plan for that yet.
The woman glared at him like he just told her she was ugly. He didn't, because she wasn't. She was kind of plain until she scowled at him and showed she had some fire in her breast. But I don't chase after women with babies. Garen pushed his mind back on track. He was saving the world, not finding a date. He could do that when there was a later. Look, there's a mad goddess who has a magical crystal, and she struck a deal with a really bad guy to destroy all of time. If she succeeds, none of this will exist, and that includes you and your children. Garen waved to the spell circle, which looked more like a giant semi-transparent glowing green sphere. So, if you want those kiddos to grow up at all, you'd better take this spell circle down, then run like all of hell is chasing you, as far and as fast as you can.
What are you talking about? My daughter isn't a mad goddess.
The woman rose and stepped over the mage, so the rock separated them. Is that your daughter? Garen stepped to the side and gestured to Pristina. Reality warped around the gray crystal in her hands. Faye tried to reach through the summoning spell to remove that crystal from her grasp, but she kept grabbing handfuls of earth magic instead.
Now, who is she?
The woman stepped back and tripped over the mage, but he was quick to move his giggling son out of her way. She landed on her butt beside him, still gripping her baby, but the baby didn't make a fuss. She's the end of everything you hold dear if you don't do something quick. Garen swung his legs over the altar rock and climbed over the mage so he could help them up.
Can't you do something?
The woman accepted his hand, and he pulled her to her feet. No, I'm an ex-war god, not a mage. The name's Garen, by the way.
I'm Robin, and he's called Sarn.
The woman waved to the mage as he sat up and looked a bit more alive than his pallor suggested. I wish I could say it was nice to meet you, but I'd be lying if I said that. Garen helped the mage up next, and the spell circle didn't fight him, probably because the mage was still in contact with the spell circle through his boots. Mages do most of their spell casting from their feet, since that put them in touch with their element, so that made sense. But the mage didn't even glance at what was happening on the other side of the spell circle. Maybe the mage didn't want to know. Sarn clutched his son to his chest and kept his head down and his glowing eyes fixed on the luminous symbols under his boots like they were the most interesting things he'd ever seen in his life. They might be, given how young he was. If you're going to do something, I recommend you do it now before it's too late. Garen grimaced as the wind whipped out of the hole in reality that damned time crystal created. A gray mist seeped out of the hole, and he had a fair idea of where it went. The gray between. An invisible force plunged into his chest and hauled him up as it pulled on something inside him. The force yanked it until the thing ripped free in a burst of pain that turned his sight red for a moment. Then it pulled that thing until it knocked against the cage of his ribs, sending pain rippling along them as they flexed outward. What's happening to me? Garen spun and saw that Faye, Hethaglir, Istiana, Janari, and Pristina all stood on tiptoes with their chests thrust outward.
Isn't it grand? He's stripping us of our immortality so we can die.
Pristina laughed as the gray crystal shot out of her hands. All the green light vanished as if the mage sucked all his power back into himself, and he probably had. That was the smart thing to do, and he didn't look like a fool. Did he break the spell circle? Before he could ask, a white flash blinded Garen as an invisible force flung him away from the haven, and he fell until the ground stopped him. The shock of his landing traveled up his legs, but it didn't hurt nearly as much as the throbbing ache of invisible fingers pushing his ribs aside so they could push something through the muscles and skin and eject something from his body. Garen blinked to clear his eyes until he realized the light in his eyes now was the entrance to the gateway out of hell. Well, I wanted to enter it. Since no one appeared to stop him, and it was only a foot in front of him, he staggered across the threshold. At least one thing went according to plan. He pushed himself into a run, and that lessened the pain, and the invisible force didn't push as hard on his ribs. Maybe if he ran fast enough, he could outrun whatever that spell was trying to do to him. It was worth a try, so he ran like his immortality depended on it. I hope you stop Pristina Faye, but maybe wait until her plan strips her and your foolish brother of his powers, so we never have to go through this again. As time gods went, Faye and Istiana were the only good ones anyway. They'd all be better off if they were the only ones who had any power over time. He sent that wish out, even though he had no illusions about it reaching Faye, or her actually hearing it. But it was a nice thought, and it lent him speed as he ran through the blindingly white tunnel that burrowed through everything in between hell and the gray between. I hope there's an army at the other end of this thing. I deserve one, after all I've been through. You've been listening to Summon the Gods, Book 2 of the Rogue Gods Trilogy by Melinda Kucsera. Subscribe to the channel so you'll be notified when the sequel publishes. The Rogue Gods Trilogy is available as an ebook and paperback, and now a full-cast audiobook. Click the link in the description to order your copy. If you love the Rogue Gods Trilogy, then you'll love Melinda's other epic fantasy adventure books too. They're just as full of magic and mayhem and characters who will do anything to achieve their goals. Check them out at the link in the description, and while you're there, sign up for her newsletter so her characters can talk directly to you. Thank you for listening.